I never thought the price of my health would become a battlefield for my children. Last week, when the nurse handed me the first bill, 5 digits long before a single surgery had even begun, I heard my son mutter, "That's not my responsibility." The words cut deeper than the chest pain that had sent me here. If you've ever felt that same sting, when family argues about money instead of love, I invite you to stay with me through this story. And if you're listening on YouTube, please tap like, hit subscribe, and share your own thoughts in the comments. It helps me know these stories matter to more than just me. I'm Richard, 65, a widower who once believed hard work could hold a family together. For 4 decades I ran a small machine shop on the edge of town, welding and grinding until my hands carried more scars than skin. My late wife, Evelyn, worked nights at the diner to keep health insurance paid. Together we raised 2 children, Daniel, my oldest, and Claire, my daughter who lives just 2 streets away. It was a quiet Thursday morning when my body finally reminded me I wasn't indestructible. I'd been raking leaves in the yard, a chore Evelyn used to love. The sky had been gray with the promise of snow, the air sharp in my lungs. Then all at once, the rake slipped from my grip. My knees buckled and the world tilted. I remember the cold ground, the sting of damp earth against my cheek, and the neighbor shouting my name before everything blurred. The next clear memory was the ambulance ceiling sliding above me, lights flashing red across the window. My chest ached like a clamp tightening with every breath. I tried to speak Evelyn's name, but only a croak came out. When I woke again, I was in a hospital bed, white sheets stiff around me, the steady beep of a monitor measuring each fragile second. And there they were, my children, standing at the foot of my bed, not with tears of worry but with tension in their voices. Claire leaned in first, her face pale. "Dad, they need to run more tests. The doctor says it could be serious." She tried to hide the fear in her eyes, but I could see it. Then Daniel shook his head, eyes already darting toward the clipboard where costs were listed. "These hospitals overcharge everything. He doesn't need half those tests. We should think about how much we're willing to spend." Even now, retelling it, I feel the hollowness of that sentence. How much we're willing to spend. I was lying there, their father, flesh and blood, yet already being measured in dollars. The nurses wheeled me for scans, machines humming like factory belts, and I thought back to all those years I worked double shifts. Every extra hour, every sore muscle had been for them, to make sure they had opportunities I never had. College tuition, down payments, weddings. Evelyn and I never took a vacation beyond a day at the lake, because there was always something the kids needed more. And yet here in this sterile room my worth was up for debate. That night the hallway outside my room echoed with their voices. I pretended to sleep, eyes half closed, while I listened. Claire argued, "I'll cover the first round of treatment if you'll split the rest." Daniel scoffed, "Why should I? Dad left the shop to me. I've got enough overhead. Besides, he looks stable." Stable, as if stability was the same as survival. Their words sank like stones in my chest. In that moment I wasn't just sick. I was reduced to a liability, a problem to be budgeted. The next morning the doctor came in with fresh scans. His tone was grave, his clipboard heavy. "We'll need a surgical consult," he said, though his eyes softened as he looked at me. He added numbers I could hardly fathom. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten and Claire's fingers tremble. Something shifted inside me then. Weak as I felt, a clarity settled over me. They were revealing their true selves under pressure. Evelyn used to say, "Crisis doesn't build character, it shows it." She was right. Later, when the nurse left the room, I noticed a thin folder tucked beneath my chart, stamped in red, "Private Addendum." I remembered Evelyn's careful handwriting, the nights she whispered about wanting to make sure the kids learned responsibility, not just entitlement. I couldn't reach for the file yet, too many eyes around me. But I knew it mattered. And as my children bickered once more over the cost of keeping me alive, I realized Evelyn's voice might still guide the outcome of this storm. That was the beginning. A single hospital bill turned into a war over loyalty and love, and that hidden folder, still waiting in the shadows, would change everything we thought we knew about inheritance, sacrifice, and who truly deserves what. The night after my collapse was long. Machines clicked and hummed beside me, each rhythm reminding me that I was tethered here, half living by tubes and wires. Nurses came and went, adjusting drips, scribbling notes, offering small smiles meant to reassure. But my eyes were on the hallway where I knew my children waited. When morning arrived, the nurse suggested I rest while the doctor prepared test results. They wheeled me out briefly for an X-ray, and when I returned, I caught sight of the waiting room through the half-open door. My son and daughter sat apart like strangers, separated not just by chairs but by resentment years in the making. Claire was on the edge of her seat, phone clutched in her hands. She glanced at her watch, then at Daniel, who leaned back with arms crossed, his suit jacket wrinkled from sleeping upright. He looked less like a son keeping vigil and more like a man waiting for a business meeting to end. I drifted in and out, but voices carried through walls thinner than anyone realized. "I already called the billing department," Claire whispered sharply. "They're asking for an advance on Dad's procedure. And you offered what, your teacher's salary?" Daniel's tone was mocking. "You can't cover this. Be realistic." "I'm realistic enough to know Dad doesn't deserve to lie here with no plan." Their words pressed against me heavier than the oxygen mask. My children weren't discussing my recovery. They were negotiating my price tag. The doctor finally summoned them inside. He carried a folder, face grave, voice steady. He explained the situation: arterial blockages, surgical intervention necessary, costs outlined in neat, unforgiving figures. He placed the estimate on the counter as though numbers could explain life itself. Daniel picked it up, lips pressing tight. "Outrageous," he muttered. Claire's eyes darted between the doctor and me. "I'll help however I can." Her voice cracked, but her hands tightened around her phone like she was already calculating loans and overtime shifts. The doctor cleared his throat. "It's best not to delay, every hour matters." Silence filled the room, broken only by the squeak of Daniel's pen as he circled figures on the bill, as if the ink could lower them. When they stepped outside again, the argument resumed, sharper now. I could hear every word from my bed. "You've got the shop," Claire said, her voice rising. "Dad gave you the business. That's income he could have kept. You should take responsibility now." Daniel's laugh was hollow. "The shop barely breaks even. You think I'm flush with cash? If Dad had managed better, we wouldn't be in this mess." The accusation stung, even muffled through the wall. I had built that shop from nothing: steel beams, welding sparks, late nights, early mornings. To hear my son dismiss it as mismanagement was like hearing him spit on every scar I carried. I closed my eyes and memory pulled me backward. Evelyn and I, young and stubborn, scraping pennies to buy second-hand machines. Nights she'd bring coffee in chipped mugs while I kept the grinders running. She'd say, "One day this shop will be theirs." She believed in building a legacy. I believed in teaching them responsibility. Somewhere between those beliefs, something had gone wrong. By afternoon, Claire entered my room alone. She tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her fatigue. She set a paper cup of coffee on my tray and whispered, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll find a way." She thought I was too groggy to respond, but I managed a faint nod. Inside, pride and sorrow tangled together. She was carrying a burden too heavy for one pair of shoulders. Minutes later, Daniel appeared, phone pressed to his ear, talking numbers with someone. He ended the call abruptly when he saw me watching. His smile was quick, brittle. "Don't worry about anything, Dad, rest." The words floated in the air, insincere. That evening, as twilight bled through the blinds, the nurse tidied my charts. In the shuffle of papers, I caught sight of that same slim folder I'd noticed before, the one stamped in red, "Private Addendum." It wasn't touched, not even acknowledged. Yet its presence seemed louder now, almost pulsing beneath the fluorescent light. Evelyn's voice echoed in my memory. "Promise me they'll learn the value of what we gave them." Perhaps this folder held her attempt to keep that promise alive. The siblings passed each other in the hallway, eyes avoiding contact. Words left unsaid but heavy in the air. I could almost see the lines drawn, one child ready to sacrifice, the other calculating angles. And I, lying between them, realized this wasn't simply about my surgery. It was about everything Evelyn and I had poured into them: the house, the shop, the savings. It was about whether love could survive when weighed against money. As I drifted to sleep, I knew one thing: that folder would not stay closed forever. And when it opened, it would decide more than just hospital bills. That was how the second day began, not with healing but with fractures widening, a family waiting to see which would crack first: the artery in my chest or the bond between my children. I used to think silence was safer than conflict. That belief kept our family dinners polite, even when tensions bubbled just beneath the surface. But in the waiting room of St. Mary's Hospital, silence no longer shielded us. It sharpened the edges of every word. Through the cracked door, I watched my children from the corner of my eye. Claire leaned forward, elbows on her knees, lips pressed tight. Daniel sat opposite, scrolling his phone with the indifference of a man waiting for a delayed flight. I could read their postures as easily as I once read blueprints. She carried weight, he carried excuses. Their voices rose, drifting into my room. "You never showed up when Mom was sick," Claire said. Her voice was soft, but it struck like a hammer. "You had 100 reasons, meetings, deadlines, but never time." Daniel snapped his phone shut. "And you think being her shadow in the hospital changed the outcome? At least I kept the shop running. Someone had to." Her laugh was bitter. "Running it into the ground, maybe." The air in the hallway turned brittle. Years of unspoken grievances poured into that space, and I, tethered to machines, was their unwilling witness. I closed my eyes and Evelyn's face appeared, her soft smile under the kitchen lamp, her tired hands folding laundry past midnight. She used to tell me, "They'll never see us the same way. Claire will understand sacrifice. Daniel, he needs structure." I thought time would iron out those differences. Now I realized time had only deepened the creases. Claire stormed into my room a little later, cheeks flushed. She pulled a chair close to my bed. "Dad, don't listen to him," she said quickly, as though Daniel's words had poisoned the air. "He doesn't know what you've done. He doesn't remember the double shifts, the weekends you skipped rest so he could go to summer camp." Her hands shook as she spoke. She wasn't just defending me, she was defending the memory of Evelyn, of every quiet sacrifice that had kept this family afloat. I managed a faint smile, though my chest ached. "You've carried more than your share," I whispered. She shook her head, eyes glistening. "I don't mind, but he never sees it." Moments later, Daniel appeared in the doorway, uninvited. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "What's this, Dad?" Her pity show. "Daniel," Claire warned. He ignored her. All these years she played the martyr, and now she wants the reward. That's what this is about. I wished I had the strength to rise, to steady the storm. But my body lay weak, my voice too thin. All I could do was watch them fracture further, Evelyn's children tearing each other apart in front of the man who loved them both. The nurse intervened with a polite cough, asking them to step outside. But I could still hear fragments: Claire insisting she'd cover the first payment, Daniel muttering about not throwing money into a bottomless pit. Each sentence carved another line between them. That night, after visiting hours ended, I drifted into half-sleep. The machines beeped steadily, but my dreams wandered elsewhere. I saw Evelyn in the old kitchen, steam rising from a pot of soup. She hummed the hymn she always hummed when she was worried. In the dream, she set a sealed envelope on the table, tapping it with her finger. When I woke, the red-stamped folder still sat beneath my chart. The dream and reality blurred until I could no longer tell if Evelyn had whispered through memory or through paper. The next morning, Daniel returned early, carrying black coffee for himself. He didn't offer one to Claire. He sat near my bed, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "Dad," he began, "we need to be practical. Long-term care costs could drain everything. The shop won't survive if I funnel money here. Maybe Claire should take on more since she's so eager." I stared at him, searching his face for the boy who once clutched my hand on the walk to kindergarten. The boy who asked endless questions about engines and sparks. But the man before me spoke only the language of numbers, not of family. Claire arrived moments later, overhearing the tail end of his reasoning. She dropped her coat on a chair, eyes blazing. "You talk about practicality like it's courage, but courage is staying, Daniel. Courage is sacrifice." He rolled his eyes. "Courage doesn't pay bills." Her voice cracked. "Neither does selfishness." Their words clashed like hammer against steel, and I feared the fracture would become permanent. I looked toward the folder again, still untouched, still holding answers they hadn't guessed. My heart thudded weakly, but my mind was clear. Sooner or later, the truth inside that file would decide more than arguments ever could. For now, though, I let them fight. I let their words expose who they had become. Evelyn once said, "The hardest lesson is letting children reveal themselves." Perhaps this was the moment she'd meant. As the sun dipped beyond the hospital windows, painting the walls in gold, I felt both sorrow and strange anticipation. The fracture in my family was undeniable. Yet somewhere inside that slim red folder, a different kind of reckoning waited, one Evelyn herself had set in motion. And when it came to light, neither Claire's tears nor Daniel's defiance would remain the same. Morning light seeped through the blinds, a pale wash across the hospital floor. I had barely slept. My body was heavy, but my mind would not rest. I knew the doctor was coming with test results, and I knew my children would hear numbers louder than they heard diagnoses. Sure enough, the door creaked open and Dr. Patel stepped in, his white coat crisp, his eyes lined with fatigue. He carried a folder that looked far too thin to contain anything good. Claire rose from her chair immediately, her notepad already open. Daniel stayed seated, arms folded, the way a man braces for bad news at a board meeting. Dr. Patel cleared his throat. "Mr. Miller, we've run a series of scans. The blockages are significant. Surgery is the best course. Without it, the risk of a major cardiac event is very high." His words landed gently, but the silence that followed was anything but gentle. Then came the figures. He laid out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the tray at my bedside. The numbers glared at me, tens of thousands, and that was only the estimate. Medications, ICU stay, follow-up care, everything stacked into a total that looked more like a mortgage than a medical bill. Claire leaned in close, her pen racing across the page. "Okay, we'll find a way," she whispered, mostly to herself. Her voice trembled, but her determination was plain. Daniel, on the other hand, let out a low whistle. "This is absurd. They inflate these costs. Insurance should cover more than this." The doctor shook his head. "Insurance will help, yes, but there are deductibles, co-pays, and limits. Someone will need to authorize the advance." The word advance froze the air. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten. "So what? Just write a blank check? We should at least shop around, get second opinions." Claire shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "This isn't a car repair, Daniel. It's Dad's heart." He shrugged. "Emotions don't change invoices." I wanted to speak, to tell them not to argue in front of the doctor, not to let money eclipse love, but my chest constricted and words came out as shallow breaths. Dr. Patel cleared his throat again, gently but firmly. "Time is important here. The longer we delay, the greater the risk. Please think carefully." Then he left the room, the paper still glowing with its harsh numbers. The moment the door closed, Daniel snatched the estimate. "Look at this line," he said, jabbing a finger at the page. "Anesthesia fee, 10,000. Ridiculous." Claire took the sheet from him. "And what would you suggest, Daniel? Bargain for a discount while Dad lies here." Her voice cracked and I saw the glimmer of tears. She held the paper as if it were both a weapon and a burden. Daniel stood pacing, his polished shoes striking the linoleum with each step. "I'm just saying we can't bankrupt ourselves over one procedure. Dad wouldn't want that." I closed my eyes, pain lancing deeper than my arteries. How could he speak for what I wanted when he never asked me directly? The nurse slipped in quietly to adjust my Roman 4. I caught her giving me a look sympathetic but helpless. She had probably seen this scene before, families torn between compassion and cost. When she left, the room grew heavy again. Claire finally set the paper down on my tray. "I'll cover the advance," she said, voice steady though her hands shook. "I'll use my savings. It's not much, but it'll start the process." Daniel scoffed. And when that dries up, you'll be begging me to step in. Don't pretend you can shoulder this alone." Her eyes flared. "I'd rather carry it myself than let you treat Dad like a spreadsheet." The words struck and Daniel turned away, but his silence spoke louder than any reply. As they argued, I stared at the paper again. To anyone else, it was a bill. To me, it was a mirror, reflecting not only the price of survival, but the value my children placed on me. Claire saw sacrifice. Daniel saw liability. And somewhere in the fold of another document I had glimpsed, Evelyn's handwriting might still be guiding us toward a truth none of them expected. That evening the hallways glowed with muted light. Claire sat beside me, softly humming the same hymn Evelyn once loved. Daniel had left, muttering about calls to make. I whispered, my voice barely audible, "Don't carry it all, Claire." She touched my hand. "I can handle it." But her eyes betrayed exhaustion, and I thought again of that folder marked Private Addendum. I hadn't yet read it, but I sensed what it might contain. Evelyn's last attempt to steer this family toward responsibility. The open loop lingered as I drifted to sleep. What exactly was written inside that file? And when revealed, would it heal this family or break it completely? The bill lay on my tray like a storm cloud, its numbers casting shadows across the room. Claire had promised to help, Daniel had scoffed, and I was left to listen as their voices collided again. "Of course you'll pay the advance," Daniel said, pacing at the foot of my bed. His tone was half sneer, half challenge. "That's what you've always done, play the hero. But when the money runs out, don't come knocking on my door." Claire shot up from her chair, her voice shaking. "You make it sound like Dad is some burden we should toss back and forth. He gave you the shop, Daniel. He gave you everything." His laugh was short and sharp. "Everything. He left me with a sinking business, outdated equipment, and employees who quit the moment I tightened rules. Don't paint it like a gift. It was a hand-me-down with debts attached." Her eyes blazed. "You never appreciated what it cost him. He built that place with his bare hands." Their words lashed back and forth while I lay still, my pulse skipping to the rhythm of their argument. I wanted to stop them, to remind them that family isn't measured in debts and credits, but my voice was drowned out by their war of memory. "You didn't show up for Mom's last weeks," Claire spat. "I sat by her bed every night while you claimed you were too busy balancing ledgers." "What balance? You were avoiding guilt." Daniel's face hardened. "You think playing nurse made you saintly. You clung to her so you could hold it over me later, like you're doing now." The room felt colder. Even the machines around me seemed to quiet, listening to the fracture deepen. I remembered Evelyn's last autumn, her hands thin but warm as she held mine. She told me, "Don't let them fight over us, Richard. Promise me." I promised then, believing my children would hold together once grief settled. How wrong I had been. Daniel pulled the estimate sheet toward him again, circling figures with his pen, pressing so hard the paper nearly tore. "Here's the truth. Claire wants to spend recklessly so she can look virtuous. But when the bills pile high, she'll expect me to cover it. That's her game." Claire ripped the paper from his hand. "And your game, sitting back, doing nothing, and hoping Dad doesn't make it through so you won't have to pay." Her words silenced the room. Even Daniel froze, shock flickering across his face. For a moment, I thought he might strike back with something even crueler, but instead he tossed his pen onto the chair and walked toward the window. "Believe what you want," he muttered. "I'm not draining my life for a lost cause." A lost cause. That's what he called me, his father. The man who once carried him on my shoulders through 4th of July parades, who fixed his first car with him in the garage, who co-signed his first loan. To hear that phrase now was like feeling soil tossed on my grave while I still breathed. Claire knelt beside my bed, tears brimming. "Don't listen to him, Dad. I'll take care of you." I squeezed her hand weakly. She meant every word, but the weight was too much for one daughter alone. Later that evening, Daniel left the room, muttering about real responsibilities. The click of the door shutting was both a relief and an ache. Claire sat in silence, staring at the floor. "Why does he hate me so much?" she whispered, though I knew the question was meant for herself. I wanted to answer, to tell her he didn't hate her, that he was just blinded by fear, by pride, by the weight of his own failures. But I couldn't bring myself to soften his cruelty. Not after the words he'd thrown. As the hallway quieted, a nurse entered to adjust my Roman 4. She tidied the stack of papers on the counter, and once again that slim red folder caught my eye. Private addendum. Its presence was like a heartbeat of its own, steady, insistent. The nurse didn't touch it. No one did. But I knew sooner or later it would open, and when it did, this blame game would look like child's play compared to what was coming. That night's sleep came fitfully. I dreamt of Evelyn standing between Daniel and Claire trying to hold their hands together, but her fingers slipped and the two drifted apart, leaving her silhouette fading in the middle. I woke with a start, the monitor beeping louder, Claire stirring beside me. She touched my arm gently. "It's okay, Dad, rest." But I knew rest wouldn't come, not while the storm brewed louder each day. The loop was tightening. The bills loomed larger, the resentment heavier. And in the middle of it all lay that unopened file, Evelyn's last attempt to teach her children what love truly costs. The hospital at night carries a strange rhythm. The corridors quiet down, the fluorescent lights hum softly, and the world outside shrinks to the size of one narrow window. Claire had dozed off in the chair beside me, her head tilted, her hair falling across her face. For the first time in days there was silence. No arguments, no bills waved in the air, just the sound of my own heart trying to keep time. And in that silence, memory rose. I was 25 again, standing in a half-finished garage with bare walls and the smell of rust. The machine shop was nothing more than a dream back then, cobbled together from used equipment and grit. I remember Evelyn arriving after her shift at the diner, her uniform faintly scented with coffee and grease, setting a thermos on the workbench. "You're still at it," she teased, though her smile was soft. I wiped the sweat from my brow. "Can't stop now. If I do, it all falls apart." She leaned against the bench, watching the sparks fly as I welded. The light caught her tired face, but her eyes shone with pride. We had nothing. Just borrowed money, second-hand machines, and faith that hard work could carve out a future. Those early years were a blur of exhaustion. I worked 16-hour days. Evelyn worked nights. There were months when macaroni and cheese was our only dinner, when bills piled up and we laughed to keep from crying. But we believed. I can still see Evelyn coming home at dawn, slipping her shoes off quietly so she wouldn't wake the children. She'd sit at the kitchen table, balancing the checkbook with a pencil worn down to the nub, humming a hymn under her breath. That hum was our lifeline, a reminder that even in scarcity, love was abundant. When Daniel was born, I thought the struggle would break us. Instead, it bound us tighter. Evelyn carried him on her hip while folding laundry, whispering promises that he would never know the hunger we had known. She worked extra shifts to cover diapers, and I sold my old truck to keep the electricity on. Later, when Claire arrived, we were still climbing out of debt, but Evelyn never complained. She carried both children into the shop on weekends, their laughter echoing off steel beams while I worked. I told myself, one day they'll see this, the sweat, the sacrifice, and they'll understand. The years passed in blinks. Daniel's first bicycle, bought with overtime pay. Claire's piano lessons, squeezed into a budget that already bled. Every achievement was purchased with hours Evelyn and I could never get back. And yet we never hesitated. That was the bargain of parenthood, trading your time so your children's future might be brighter. Now, lying in this hospital bed, I wondered if they had noticed at all. Daniel saw only the debts, the aging shop. Claire, perhaps, had glimpsed the truth. She was there in the kitchen late at night, watching her mother rub her swollen feet after double shifts. She heard the tired sighs, the whispered prayers, but Daniel, he drifted through childhood cushioned by what we built, shielded from the cracks in the walls. Maybe that was our mistake. Maybe we gave too much. The beeping monitor pulled me back to the present. Claire stirred, mumbling softly in her sleep. I studied her face, so much of Evelyn in her expression, the same stubborn kindness. My heart ached not just with illness but with gratitude, and then my eyes found it again. The folder tucked beneath the chart, its red stamp glowing faintly in the dim light. Evelyn's handwriting had been neat and deliberate, her decisions always measured. If she had left something there, it wasn't by accident. I remembered the last note she ever wrote me, tucked into her Bible. Don't let them forget what we gave. At the time, I thought she meant memories, stories to pass on. Now I wondered if she had been more literal, that she had put something in writing to ensure the sacrifices were not erased by arguments and greed. I closed my eyes and the past and present overlapped, Evelyn's hum mingling with the hospital's machines, the smell of iron from the shop drifting into the sterile air. I could almost hear her voice. Richard, it's not the money. It's what they learn when they face the cost. Perhaps that was the lesson hidden in the folder. When dawn crept in, painting the walls with a thin line of light, I felt both weaker and stronger at once. Weaker in body, yes, but stronger in conviction. Evelyn and I had carried this family through storms no one else had seen. If my children were about to be tested, it was time they saw the truth of what love costs. The open loop remained. What exactly had Evelyn written into that private file? I didn't know yet, but I sensed it would not only decide my care, it would decide who my children truly were. And that reckoning was closer than either of them realized. Hospitals have their own kind of storm, quiet on the surface, but currents running fierce underneath. By the third day, Daniel had stopped pretending. He came only in bursts, dropping by with quick excuses about meetings, his phone buzzing constantly. Claire, on the other hand, rarely left my side. She fetched water, asked questions, scribbled notes on every conversation with the doctors. Her exhaustion showed, but so did her resolve. That morning, while the nurse adjusted my Roman 4, Claire stepped out to the hallway to stretch her legs. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. For the first time in days, I was alone with the paperwork stacked on the counter by my bed. And there it was again, the folder. Thin, stamped in red, private addendum. Its edges were worn as if handled more than once, yet never opened in front of me. I stared at it, heart thudding. Evelyn's voice stirred in memory. Promise me they'll learn what it cost us. When Claire returned, she noticed my gaze. Following it, her eyes landed on the folder. She tilted her head, then glanced toward the hallway as if making sure no one else was watching. "What's that?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer. My throat was too dry, my body too weak, but my silence was enough. She stepped closer, reaching for it with hesitant fingers. The nurse reappeared just then, brisk and efficient, asking her to help fetch something from the supply cart. Claire slipped her hand back quickly, but her eyes lingered on the folder as the nurse moved about the room. Later, when the nurse was gone and Daniel hadn't yet returned, Claire tried again. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Dad, I saw that file yesterday too. It's not standard. I checked with the clerk. Addendums are rare. Did Mom leave something here?" Her question pierced through me. I wanted to tell her yes, that Evelyn had always been meticulous, that she had planned in ways I'd never imagined. But all I could manage was a faint squeeze of her hand. That was enough. Claire's eyes widened, understanding flashing across her face. That evening, while I dozed, Claire slipped out. I woke to the sound of hushed voices outside the door. Daniel's voice, low and clipped. "Stop digging. If you stir this up, we'll drown in paperwork and legal mess." Claire snapped back, sharper than I'd ever heard her. "Maybe that's what you're afraid of, what Mom left behind. What if it doesn't favor you?" The silence that followed told me she'd struck the right nerve. Later, when they returned to the room together, Daniel's jaw was tight, his eyes darting toward the counter. He didn't touch the folder, but his presence near it was territorial, as if guarding something he already suspected. Claire, meanwhile, sat close to me, whispering, "Don't worry, Dad, I'll find the truth." That night, I dreamed again. Evelyn stood in the doorway of our old kitchen, light behind her, holding a thin folder in her hands. She set it on the table, her eyes serious. They must choose, not just who loves, but who sacrifices. I woke with my chest pounding. The folder was still there, unopened, silent. The next day brought new urgency. The doctor returned with updates, warning that surgery couldn't wait much longer. Claire pressed her palms together, whispering she'd take responsibility. Daniel muttered something about not rushing into financial traps. Their voices blurred, but my eyes stayed locked on that folder. Because I knew, inside that file was no ordinary note. Evelyn had left a clause, a test, something that would flip all their arguments upside down. And when it finally came to light, the real storm would begin. That was how Chapter 7 ended, not with surgery, not with peace, but with a red folder glowing like a fuse, waiting for someone brave enough to light it. The morning of the fourth day arrived heavy with tension. Rain streaked the hospital windows, blurring the view of the city beyond. Inside my room, the silence was thick enough to choke on. Daniel sat with his phone, scrolling but not reading. Claire sat upright, her fingers laced together, knuckles pale. Finally, she stood. "I can't sit here pretending anymore." She crossed the room, lifted the thin red folder from the counter, and held it against her chest. Daniel shot up instantly. "Put that back," he snapped. Claire glared at him. "Why, what are you so afraid of?" Their voices clashed, but my heart beat louder than both. Evelyn's shadow seemed to hover over the moment. I had resisted opening that folder myself, too weak, too uncertain, but perhaps it was meant for them, not me. Claire peeled back the flap. Papers slid into her hands, official forms, notarized, Evelyn's careful signature across the bottom. She read quickly, her lips moving silently, then froze. Daniel snatched the top page. His eyes scanned the lines, his face draining of color. This can't be real." I cleared my throat, weak but steady. "Read it aloud." Claire's voice trembled as she obeyed. "This addendum states that the costs of Richard Miller's care, hospital, surgery, recovery, shall be linked directly to inheritance. The child who assumes responsibility for paying those costs shall receive the estate in full." Her eyes flicked to me, then back to the page. "Failure to participate disqualifies that child from any claim." The words echoed like thunder in the small room. Daniel's jaw clenched. "So this is Mom's idea of fairness, to pit us against each other over money." Claire shook her head, tears brimming. "No, it's her way of forcing responsibility. She wanted us to prove love isn't just talk." Daniel slammed the paper back on the tray. "Convenient for you, isn't it? You swoop in, cover a few bills with your teacher's salary, and suddenly you're heir to everything." She flinched but steadied herself. "At least I'm willing. What about you?" I looked at them both, my voice rough. "Your mother didn't want division, she wanted truth. She wanted to see who would step forward, not with words but with sacrifice." Daniel turned to me, anger flashing. "And you're okay with this, letting one piece of paper decide everything?" I held his gaze. "It's not the paper, son. It's the choices you make now." The room felt colder, as though the rain outside had seeped through the walls. For years, Evelyn and I had cushioned Daniel from consequence. Now consequence stood in black and white before him, undeniable. Claire folded the addendum neatly, her voice firm. "I'll sign whatever I need to. I'll cover Dad's care." Daniel scoffed. "And when you drown in debt, don't expect me to bail you out." She didn't look at him. "I'm not asking you for anything." I watched the scene, pride and sorrow colliding in my chest. Claire's resolve burned bright, but I knew the cost would scar her. Daniel's pride kept him silent, but beneath it I glimpsed fear, the fear of losing not just inheritance but the image of being favored. The nurse entered then, breaking the tension. She glanced at the paper on my tray, eyebrows lifting slightly, but said nothing. She only checked my Roman 4, adjusted the monitor, and left as quietly as she came. For a long while, no one spoke. The rain softened, the machines beeped steadily, and Evelyn's handwriting sat between us like a judge who had delivered her verdict. The mid-twist had landed. The game had changed. Inheritance was no longer a promise. It was a test, one that demanded a price neither child had expected to pay. That night, as I lay awake, I wondered which wound would cut deeper, the cost of the hospital bills or the cost of knowing who truly loved enough to carry them. Either way, the truth had broken free. And from here on, nothing in this family would ever look the same. The clause lay between us, Evelyn's signature staring up like a ghost's handwriting. Claire had folded it neatly, but its weight pressed heavier than any machine in the room. Daniel was the first to move. He snatched the folder again, flipping through the pages as if some loophole might appear if he stared long enough. His voice cracked with anger. "This is insane. One person pays a few bills and suddenly everything we grew up with belongs to them. That's not inheritance, it's extortion. Claire didn't flinch. It's accountability, Daniel. Mom wanted to see who would actually step up, who'd take responsibility when it mattered most. Daniel's laugh was harsh, a sound more bitter than amused. And of course you jump at it. You've been waiting for a chance to play the saint. Finally, your endless sacrifices pay off with property and assets. Claire's cheeks flushed, but her voice steadied. If sacrifice is what it takes, then yes, I'll do it. Dad's health comes first. Her words shifted the air in the room. For the first time, Daniel looked cornered. The balance of power that had once tilted his way, with the shop, with his confident talk, was slipping. I watched silently, though inside me emotions tangled, pride for Claire's resolve, sorrow for Daniel's blindness, fear for what the claws might unleash. Evelyn had designed it to reveal truth, but truth is never painless. Daniel paced, his shoes striking the linoleum like a gavel. Fine, you want responsibility, then take it, but don't think I'll stand by while you rewrite the family story. Mom loved us both, she wouldn't hand it all to you. Claire held his stare. She loved us, yes, but she also knew one of us would put love into action. That's why she wrote the clause. The nurse came in briefly to check the monitor. She glanced at our faces, at the paper still on the tray, then slipped out quickly, as though she sensed a storm better avoided. Daniel turned on me then, eyes blazing. Dad, say something. Tell her this isn't right. Tell her Mom was out of her mind when she wrote that. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. Your mother was never careless, Daniel. If she wrote it, she meant it. The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Daniel slammed his fist on the window ledge. This is betrayal. I've given years to the shop, to carrying the family name, and she decides my worth comes down to a hospital bill. Claire answered quietly, almost gently. No, Daniel. Mom decided our worth shows in how we treat Dad when he needs us most. That's the real inheritance. Her words hit like a verdict. That evening, Claire signed the hospital paperwork, authorizing the first payment for my surgery. I saw her hand tremble slightly as she scrawled her name. The sound of the pen scratching across the form was louder than Daniel's heavy breathing behind her. The receptionist handed her the receipt. Claire folded it, slipped it into her purse, and whispered to me, "It's done." Daniel stood apart, arms crossed, his pride wounded. "You think this makes you noble? You'll regret it. You'll drown in debt, and when you can't keep up, you'll crawl back to me." Claire didn't look at him. Maybe, but at least I'll be able to say I didn't walk away. That night, after visiting hours ended, I lay awake replaying the day. Claire had stepped forward, pen in hand, while Daniel had stepped back, fists clenched. Evelyn's claws had worked, already the lines were drawn, but I also knew Daniel wasn't finished. His pride wouldn't allow silence for long. Somewhere in his anger, he was already planning a countermove. The rain eased outside, leaving the windows streaked but clear. I could see faint city lights, blurred but steady. And as I drifted to sleep, the thought returned. The test had begun. The estate, the house, the shop, all of it was no longer memory or promise. It was a battlefield. And tomorrow the war would escalate. Daniel didn't come back the next morning. For a while, I thought maybe the silence meant surrender, that perhaps he had finally accepted Evelyn's clause and Claire's decision. But by afternoon, I knew better. He returned not with flowers or apologies, but with a manila envelope tucked under his arm and a look that betrayed sleepless hours. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look at Claire. He pulled the chair to the far corner of the room, opened the envelope, and began spreading papers across his lap. Claire frowned. "What's all that?" Daniel didn't answer. He kept his voice low, his eyes on the print. I caught fragments: testamentary capacity, undue influence, revocation. Words cold and sharp, belonging more to courtrooms than hospital rooms. Finally, Claire snapped. "You went to a lawyer." Daniel lifted his chin. "Of course I did. Did you really think I'd let you waltz in, sign one receipt, and claim everything Mom and Dad built? That clause isn't valid. I'll prove it." I watched them, my chest heavy not just from illness but from the sight of my son trying to dismantle his mother's last wish. Claire's voice rose. "Mom's signature is right there. Witnessed, notarized, it's ironclad." Daniel smirked, though the desperation beneath it showed. "Ironclad, please. Lawyers poke holes for living. Maybe Mom wasn't of sound mind. Maybe she was coerced. Maybe this so-called clause was slipped in without full consent. His words stung like acid. Evelyn had been meticulous until her final days. To hear him tarnish her clarity felt like betrayal layered on betrayal. Claire stood, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You're disgusting." She was more clear-headed than either of us, and you know it. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash back. Instead, he shuffled his papers, highlighting passages, muttering like a man clinging to a raft in deep water. I forced my voice through the dryness in my throat. "Daniel." He looked up startled. I rarely spoke now, my energy conserved for breathing. "Your mother wasn't confused. She was deliberate. Every word she wrote, she meant." Daniel looked away quickly, hiding behind his papers. But I saw it, the flicker of doubt, the fear that his arguments were less about law and more about pride. That evening, after Claire left to grab dinner, Daniel leaned closer to me. His voice softened, almost conspiratorial. "Dad, you know Mom could be dramatic. She always had a flair for teaching lessons. This clause, maybe it wasn't meant to be taken literally. Maybe it was symbolic." I studied his face. For a moment I saw not the lawyered-up son but the boy who once begged me for reassurance after nightmares. But then his eyes hardened again, and I knew this wasn't about symbolism. It was about winning. The next day he returned with a different man, tall, gray suit, briefcase in hand. A lawyer. They spoke in the hallway first, but voices carried. Phrases like contesting probate, challenging enforceability, and temporary injunction reached my ears. Claire stormed out of the room, fury written across her face. "You're dragging strangers into this, while Dad's lying here waiting for surgery." Daniel remained calm, too calm. "I'm protecting what's mine, what's ours." "No," Claire shot back. "What you think you're entitled to." The lawyer eventually left, promising documents to be filed. Daniel looked almost triumphant, but beneath it I saw strain. His shoulders slumped once the door closed, his hands rubbing his temples. That was when I realized Daniel wasn't just angry, he was afraid. Afraid of losing not just the inheritance, but the illusion of control he'd clung to for years. That night when the room was finally quiet, Claire sat beside me, tears streaking her cheeks. "Dad, I can't believe he'd go this far, suing his own family, fighting Mom's words." I reached for her hand, though my grip was weak. "Don't lose yourself in his war. The truth has a way of standing even when challenged." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the folder, as though drawing strength from Evelyn's signature inked in black. I drifted to sleep with a thought I couldn't shake. Daniel believed a lawyer could erase Evelyn's intent. But love written in sacrifice doesn't vanish with legal ink. Still, the battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow would bring escalation, not compromise. And the clause, once hidden, was now the weapon both children wielded. The morning of my surgery arrived gray and hushed, as though the sky itself held its breath. Nurses moved with clipped efficiency, wheeling in machines, adjusting Roman IV lines, checking monitors. The room smelled of antiseptic and something sharper, fear. Claire stood near the bed, her hands folded tight, lips moving in silent prayer. She looked pale but steady, like a soldier bracing for battle. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes shadowed from another sleepless night. He had his lawyer's folder tucked under one arm, as if legal papers could stand between me and the scalpel. "Doctor," Patel entered, voice firm but kind. "Mr. Miller, it's time. We'll prep you for the operating room." He looked at Claire and Daniel. "Family may wait in the surgical lounge. It could take several hours." Claire nodded, clutching my hand. Daniel didn't move. He only muttered, "Hours and thousands of dollars." His words stung, but I forced myself not to react. If I gave them power, they'd linger in my chest, heavier than the blockages the surgeon was about to cut away. As the gurney rolled me down the hallway, fluorescent lights passed overhead like a countdown. I caught glimpses of faces, nurses, techs, strangers who didn't know me, yet carried my life in their hands. My mind drifted, searching for Evelyn. I pictured her walking beside me, her humming drowning out the squeak of wheels on tile. At the double doors to the OR, Claire kissed my forehead. "I'll be here, Dad, when you wake up." Daniel stood behind her, silent. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, not for me, but for what my survival might mean for the inheritance war. Then the doors closed and they were gone. The operating room was bright, too bright. Metal gleamed under the lights, instruments lined like soldiers awaiting command. A nurse placed a mask over my face, her voice calm. "Breathe deeply, Mr. Miller." As the world blurred, I thought of Evelyn's hands, strong even when weary. I thought of Claire's steady resolve, Daniel's clenched jaw, and the folder that carried her final lesson. Let the truth outlive me, I prayed silently, just before darkness swallowed me whole. Meanwhile, outside in the surgical lounge, the storm raged without me. Claire sat stiffly, fingers tangled together, her purse heavy with the receipt for the hospital advance. Daniel paced the room, lawyer's folder in hand, muttering under his breath. Other families whispered around them, but the tension between my children filled the space like thunderclouds. "You really think signing one check makes you the chosen one?" Daniel hissed. Claire turned to him, exhaustion written in every line of her face. "I didn't sign it to be chosen. I signed it because Dad needs help." Daniel scoffed. "You're naive. You think Mom's clause is iron law. I'll have it overturned before Dad even wakes up." Her reply was quiet but sharp. "And when the judge asks what you contributed while Dad fought for his life, what will you say?" The question silenced him for a heartbeat. Then he turned away, jaw clenched. Hours passed. Claire whispered prayers, Daniel scribbled notes, and the clock hands crawled. Every time a nurse entered the lounge, Claire's eyes darted up, but it was never news. Finally, Dr. Patel appeared, mask dangling from his neck, face damp with sweat. The room fell silent. He looked at my children with measured gravity. "The surgery was successful," he said, "but recovery will be critical. He'll need intensive care, close monitoring, and continued treatment. This is only the first step." Claire exhaled a shaky breath, tears spilling freely. "Thank God," Daniel muttered, and another mountain of bills. They followed Dr. Patel to the ICU window where I lay pale but alive, machines beeping steadily. Claire pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "You did it, Dad. You held on." Daniel stood behind her, arms crossed, but his face betrayed something, relief mixed with dread. Because as long as I lived, Evelyn's clause lived too. And now, every bill that arrived, every signature on a payment slip, was a line written in the ledger of inheritance. That night, as the machines hummed beside me, I drifted in and out of restless dreams. Evelyn's voice came clear. "The hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms, Richard. They're fought in hearts." And I knew. The surgery had saved my body, but the real operation was still ahead. The one that would cut open my family, exposing who they truly were. The ICU has a strange way of measuring time. Hours pass, yet the hands on the clock seem reluctant to move. I floated in and out of sleep, half listening to the steady beep of monitors, half dreaming of Evelyn's hum drifting through the house we once built together. On the second morning after surgery, a nurse brought in a small box from storage, my personal effects collected when I was admitted. Wallet, keys, wristwatch, and something else I hadn't expected, an envelope tucked neatly among them, yellowed at the edges. Claire spotted it first. She leaned over, curiosity flickering in her tired eyes. "Dad, what's this?" I recognized the handwriting instantly. Evelyn's. Even after 2 years, her script was unmistakable, careful, looping, filled with patience. My heart clenched. Claire opened the envelope gently, as if afraid it might crumble. Inside was a single letter, folded twice, written in ink that had faded but not lost its strength. She glanced at me. I nodded weakly. She read aloud. "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, it means my time came sooner than we wanted. I know how you love the children, how you always shield them. But shielding isn't teaching. This clause isn't about money, it's about showing them what love costs. The one who sacrifices without counting will be the one who understands us best. Please don't let them forget. Let them face the choice. Love, Evelyn." Claire's voice cracked at the end. The room fell into silence heavy as stone. Daniel stood by the window, back turned, but his shoulders stiffened. So it's true, she really wanted this circus. Claire folded the letter carefully, holding it like a relic. She wanted us to learn. She wanted you to learn, Daniel. He spun around, anger flashing. Don't preach to me. Mom didn't know what she was asking. Sacrifice. She already worked herself into the grave for this family. And now you expect me to do the same. Claire's eyes blazed. That's the point. She gave everything and you never noticed. Not when she skipped doctor's visits to cover your tuition. Not when she pawned her jewelry so you could buy that first car. Don't you dare say you understand sacrifice. Her words hit harder than any scalpel. Daniel flinched, but his pride forced him to stand taller. I won't be manipulated by sentimental notes. If Dad wants fairness, we'll divide things equally. That's what law demands. I found my voice then, rough but certain. This isn't about law, Daniel. It's about legacy. Evelyn didn't want equality in numbers. She wanted equality in love. And love means paying a cost. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might walk out. But instead he slumped into the chair, burying his face in his hands. His silence spoke louder than all his arguments. Claire placed the letter back in its envelope and set it on my tray. Her hand lingered on it as if drawing strength. We'll honor this, Dad. I don't care how hard it gets. We'll carry it. Her determination soothed me, but it also terrified me. She was willing to break herself to uphold Evelyn's words, while Daniel was willing to tear us apart to avoid them. Both paths led to pain. That night when the hospital grew quiet, I held the letter in my trembling hands. Evelyn's words felt alive, whispering from the page. The one who sacrifices without counting. I wondered if she knew, when she wrote those lines, just how sharply they would cut. As I drifted back into uneasy sleep, the envelope rested on my chest, a weight both comforting and unbearable. I knew this letter would not end the conflict. It would ignite it. Tomorrow, Daniel would push harder, Claire would dig deeper, and I, caught between them, would have to decide how far to let Evelyn's test go. That was the truth of Chapter 12. Not healing, not peace, but revelation. Evelyn had spoken from beyond, and her words had lit the fuse. The next explosion was inevitable. By the 5th day after surgery, my strength had returned just enough for me to sit upright in bed. Tubes still tethered me, but my mind was clearer. Clear enough, unfortunately, to witness what came next. Claire arrived early, carrying receipts in a folder of her own. She had paid the advance, arranged a small loan, and even spoken with her principal about taking extra classes at school to cover future bills. Her face was pale but resolute, determination etched in every line. Daniel followed later, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. He carried no flowers, no encouragement, only another stack of papers. Legal briefs, highlighted clauses, printouts from late-night research. The moment they saw each other, sparks ignited. Claire set her folder on the tray. I've already made the first payment. Dad's covered for now. That's what matters. Daniel scoffed, dropping his papers onto the bed with a thud. What matters is that you're bleeding yourself dry for nothing. This clause is a sham, and I'll prove it. A judge won't let you inherit everything just because you wrote a check. Claire's eyes flashed. You still don't get it. It's not about the inheritance. It's about showing up when Dad needs us. He leaned in, voice low and venomous. Don't pretend you're not thinking about the estate. The house, the shop, the accounts. You've wanted a piece your whole life. And now Mom hands you a golden ticket from the grave. Her voice cracked, but her words were steel. The only thing I want is for Dad to live. If that costs me every penny, so be it. Can you say the same? Their shouting filled the room, echoing off sterile walls. Nurses peeked in, hesitated, then backed out quickly. Machines beeped steadily as if mocking the chaos of human hearts. Daniel slammed his palm against the counter. This is madness. He should decide. Not you. Not some letter Mom wrote when she was sick. Claire shot back. He already decided by writing her name beside his, by trusting her judgment. And then for the first time, Daniel turned on me directly. His eyes burned. Dad, tell her you don't want this circus. Tell her you'll split things fairly like any decent man would. The room went still. Claire's breath caught. Daniel's chest heaved. Both pairs of eyes locked on me, waiting, demanding. I felt Evelyn's letter heavy in my pocket, her handwriting a whisper against my chest. I looked at Claire. the fire in her, born from her mother. I looked at Daniel, the fear behind his fury, the pride that shielded his weakness, and then I spoke. Enough. My voice cracked the silence. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight heavier than shouting. You've both spent days arguing over paper, over numbers, but this isn't about paper, it's about me, it's about your mother. Daniel stepped closer, desperate. Then say it, Dad, say the clause doesn't matter, say it was just Mom's way of. I cut him off. No, the clause stands. Evelyn wrote it because she knew the truth would come out when tested, and it has. Daniel staggered back as if struck. Claire blinked, tears welling. I drew a shaky breath. Your mother defended you, Daniel, every time you stumbled. She believed you'd rise if given enough chances. But chances don't last forever. Love without sacrifice is empty. His lips parted, but no words came. I turned to Claire. And you, my daughter, you've carried too much, shouldered more than anyone asked. I see that, and I'm proud, but this test isn't about crushing you. It's about proving who's willing to pay the cost, not just once, but always. Claire nodded, eyes wet. I let the silence hang, then delivered the words that ended their war. I've chosen. Both of them leaned forward, breath held. I met Daniel's eyes first. It isn't you. Not because you failed the shop or the loans or even because you fought the clause. It's because when I needed you most, you reached for excuses instead of my hand. His face crumpled. The mask of confidence cracked, revealing the boy underneath. I turned to Claire. You stepped forward. Without asking what you'd gain, you gave. That's what your mother wanted. That's what I want. The inheritance, the house, the shop, they'll be yours. Daniel stumbled back, gripping the windowsill, his face pale. So that's it. Decades of loyalty mean nothing. I closed my eyes briefly. Loyalty without sacrifice isn't loyalty at all. The room was silent again, save for the steady beep of the monitor. Evelyn's lesson had been spoken aloud, and though it broke one child's pride and burdened the other's shoulders, the truth was undeniable. For the first time in days, I felt at peace. The day after I spoke my decision, the hospital felt quieter, as if even the walls understood something had shifted. Daniel hadn't returned that morning. His absence hung heavy, but it wasn't unexpected. Pride has its own gravity. It pulls a man away when he feels he's lost. Claire sat by my side, her folder of receipts stacked neatly on the tray. She didn't look triumphant, only tired. I studied her face, so much like Evelyn's when she was young, determined, tender, carrying strength she didn't know she had. Dad, she whispered, I don't want to take everything. It feels wrong. I shook my head slowly, my voice soft but clear. You're not taking, Claire, you're carrying. There's a difference. Your mother's lesson was never about ownership. It was about responsibility. You proved you were willing to carry it. Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded as if she finally understood. When the lawyer arrived 2 days later, I asked for the paperwork to be drawn up. The estate, the house, the shop, all of it would go to Claire under one condition. She must keep Evelyn's foundation alive. Scholarships for children in need, donations to cancer research, projects that built futures instead of breaking them. The lawyer hesitated. Mr. Miller, are you certain? Excluding your son entirely may cause long-term conflict. I'm certain, I said. This isn't punishment, it's clarity. Claire signed where she needed to, her hand steady. I signed last, my pen trembling slightly but my heart calm. The documents were sealed, notarized, final. Evelyn's vision was no longer words in a letter, it was law. That evening the sun slanted through the blinds, painting the room gold. I asked Claire to bring me Evelyn's letter. She placed it in my hands, worn edges soft from her fingers. I read it again, slowly, as though each word stitched the wound inside me. The one who sacrifices without counting will be the one who understands us best. For the first time since Evelyn's passing, I felt peace. Not because the fight was over, but because her voice had guided us exactly where it needed to. Days later, Daniel finally appeared. His face was pale, eyes shadowed, pride worn down into something quieter. He didn't speak much. He just stood by the window, watching the rain streak down. When he finally turned, his voice was raw. Dad, I don't agree, but I understand. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. I looked at him, then at Claire, then at the folder of papers that had nearly torn us apart. And I realized money had never been the enemy. It was what money revealed: love or selfishness, loyalty or pride. Evelyn's test had uncovered all of it, unmasking the children we had raised. And though it broke me to see the fracture, it also freed me. The truth had been spoken. The choice had been made. As I prepare for discharge, I know the hardest battles lie ahead, Claire carrying more than her share, Daniel struggling with resentment. But I also know Evelyn's voice will echo through every step. Her lesson lives on. I whispered to the empty chair where she once sat, "We did it, Evelyn. They've seen the cost of love. And one day, maybe, even Daniel will understand." That is where my story leaves you, not with victory, not with defeat, but with clarity. Family isn't measured in wills or bank accounts. It's measured in who stands by you when standing costs the most. Headphone, and if you've been listening this far, thank you. These stories matter because they remind us what's fragile and what's worth protecting. If this story touched you, please give it a like, hit subscribe, and share your own thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your experiences, your battles, your sacrifices, your lessons. Thank you for watching. Until the next story, take care of yourself and of each other.